Good. We continue. So there's two more design principles that I need to discuss with you. They are going to be proportion and contrast, and both of them are very important, and both of them are also a lot of fun, right? So let's talk about proportion first. When you think of the word proportion, I want you to think about size. That is really key, right? So proportion have to do with size, and that is very important to understand because, for example, if I draw for you this and I say to you this is a laundry machine, then you say no, that doesn't look like one, right? Because the size or the proportions of the things are not correct, because that's not what it looked like, right? Now, I told you, I think in my first lesson or something, that you know exactly what things are supposed to look like because you can name them. And if you can name something, that means that you have learned at a certain point when you were a child how to recognize something. So that means you know what the sizes of different things should be, right? So proportion have to do with size. This is a way better size for a laundry machine, right? Okay. Now you can play around with sizes. It's a lot of fun, right? And then you're talking about relationship of sizes. For example, if I draw for you, let's say something like this, then it looked like a house, right? Oop, a little bit, something like this. Now, depending on how big I were to draw the door and the windows, I can make it either bigger or I can make it feel smaller, right? So you're working with proportions basically all the time, right? Proportions of a single object, but also the relationship between objects. For example, if I draw something along these lines, whoops, that's a little bit weird. Well, let's go a little bit more like this, whatever, look. Then you can say, okay, well, this I guess look like a little dog house right now, right? But if I were to, for example, add next to it like a bowl, like maybe this big, then I could say, well, that's either a really small dog bowl or it's a really big dog house, right? So I need more information to show you, right? So for example, if I put next to this dog house like maybe a dog house that is like more regular sized, then still, you know, I can say, okay, well, I have now like one small dog house and I have like one big dog house. Maybe you have like a big dog and maybe you have like a small dog, for example, right? So the relationship of size is really important. It's a lot of fun. If I were to draw the dog ball like really big, for example, then it would feel the other way around, see? And I have like a really tiny, whoop, dog, like a really tiny dog house, right? So size and proportion is one and the same thing, right? And you can really play a lot with proportions and size. It is a lot of fun to do. And you will also immediately know if something is not right. Because if I, for example, draw for you something along these lines, whoop, let's say something like this maybe. Oh, I'm a little bit rusty. A little bit rusty with the drawing today, guys. It's okay. Try and fix it a little bit. Whoa. What am I doing here? Okay. Turn this down a little bit. Okay. So let's say I wanted to draw a face, for example, right? That's what I would like to do. Then I could sketch something along these lines, right? Now, the face also have certain proportions, right? So for example, I know from experience that you can divide a face like this, where you can say, okay, well, if I go like this, then I can say this is half, right? So the eyes should be at, let's say, half. Well, another thing I can tell you is that eyes, actually, there's a certain amount of eyes that are going to fit inside my drawing. In fact, it's gonna look something like this, right? I have in between my eyes the size of one eye, right? So that is very handy if you know that. So I can place those in the right spot. Now also know that if I divide this part in half, that is where the nose roughly should be, right? So I could draw like something like this maybe. Whoops. Put a couple of little tiny lines over here, like this. And then you can see it already start to feel a little bit like it's going to be a face, right? Now, if I were to draw the mouth over here, then you're going to say, that looks a little bit weird. There's too much space here, right? So that also have rules. For example, if I divide this one in 1, 2, 3, that is where the lip should be, right? So if I do that, I can draw that. Now I also know that if my mouth is at rest, it ends sort of there, you know, it ends sort of underneath the eyes is where it should roughly stop. Then I have like my little bottom lip here, for example, and then I can draw like a little face. And then that is basically it, right? That all have to do with proportions. Super important. Okay, now let's have a look at these paintings over here, because I got a couple of different ones here to show you, right? So this one is like Cthulhu. He's like a giant dark lord of the ocean, right? Some big demon thing, and he's very big, right? Now in this painting you do not know how big he is, right? There's nothing to compare him with, so there's nothing in relationship for me to determine the size of the things, you know. I know he must be big because he's in the ocean like this, but is he in like shallow ocean or is he in deep ocean? I do not know, right? Now if you were to compare that, for example, with this painting, this is really giving you something big to compare, right? We have like small characters in the foreground. Then we have, of course, in the middle ground our big Cthulhu guy, and then we have our background, right? This painting really works because I have information, right, to compare him with. If you do not have anything to compare, then you just have no idea. Is this guy like maybe 5 centimeters tall? Is he like a meter tall? I have no idea. They give me nothing in relationship to this guy, right? And if there's nothing in relationship, then I cannot tell you the size of the thing, right? If I were to draw like maybe, I don't know, like if I were to draw like maybe some tiny shark over here, like, I don't know, make a silhouette of a little shark, for example, little hammerhead shark. Look, then you can say, oh yeah, it's a big shark, right? Because that's a tiny fish, right? So you need things to contrast. Oops, that's gonna bring me in fact into my next word, which is going to be contrast. Look, if I draw like a little submarine, then you can say, yeah, he's really big, right? So proportion is all about size, right? And there is rules to proper proportions. And as soon as you like put something out of place, it no longer will look like something that you intended to be, right? So proportion is super important. Proportion is size. Now, the last one I want to talk about is this one, and this one is, I think, maybe I don't know, maybe it's one of my favorite ones. It's going to be called contrast, right? Now, contrast is basically what I want you to think about is this, is things that are opposite things, right? For example, if I say cold, the opposite to cold is warm, right? Or if I can say like hard, then the opposite is soft. Now, if you want to create any type of art that is somewhat interesting, you have to use contrast. In fact, I 100% can guarantee you this. Look, if you do this, look, I make a circle, edit shape, circle, look, here. Just want to show you this, it's so nice, here, look. Put this guy over here, up, then I do another time this, duplicate, here. I now give you the recipe for art. It's 100% works always. Art. Art. Art is where the following things meet. First of all, it needs to look nice. Need to look nice. Then on here we do something. On here we do something opposite. Up, or we can say a contrast. If you do these things together, you can make cool art out of anything, because it will always combine here in the middle to create, it will always combine in here to create something really nice. Here, I'll show you. Look, these are some really good examples, right? So in this example, there is a very interesting contrast, because this one is combining traditional. Oh, let me get a different pen. Sorry, you cannot read. It's doing all kinds of correct. This one is combining traditional culture, and on the other side here we have fantasy manga culture. Because nowadays the younger people, they don't care about like interesting Chinese or Asian vases. They don't care at all. But all of them recognize this like new, like, you know, like manga kind of like machinery, right? So this looks nice, yes. It is, on the one hand, it's having traditional culture, and then it's been replaced on the other side with new culture or fantasy culture, right? So by opposing those two things, or contrasting those two things against each other and making it look nice, you can make very interesting art. And the same thing is happening here. Look, these are weapons, right? Weapons of war. So normally, if you use these weapons of war onto somebody, then of course the flesh, which is weak, is going to look like this, you know, like it's going to be all like ripped apart. Now in this case, they flip it around. So instead of the people being injured, they make all the weapons be injured, right? So that is also an interesting contrast. So contrast is really a big deal. And the same thing is happening over here, right? Here we have like something, at first glance, it looks pretty, you know, it's just a child on a bicycle. But if you look at it a little bit longer, then it becomes a little bit scary, because he's clearly like a little Nazi child with blue eyes and a Nazi gun and like a Nazi uniform. So basically this is on the one hand cute, and on the other hand terrifying. So by combining something that is on the one hand looks a little bit innocent, right, and on the other hand is really dark, then you can contrast those things from each other, and that will also give you interesting art, right? Same here, look. This is like something that is making things flat, and then on the other hand they make something that make holes, right? Super simple. Not very interesting, but I just wanted to show you. Look, this one is nice. Look, this one is super nice. So normally a tank is made out of a really strong material, right? It's all armor. Now, the most opposite of armor is something that is very weak. Well, a balloon is super weak, right? Now, that is one thing. Another thing that you could say is that, like, when do you use balloons? Well, you use balloons when there are happy things happening, right? And when do you use tanks? When there are things happening that are not happy, right? So it's giving me double contrast. It's first of all contrasting the material it should be made out of, and then it's also contrasting the feelings, you know, that it's going to give me. So I really like this artwork. I think it's very interesting, and that's all because of the contrast. Now I want you to quickly think about this, because this artwork really works. Now imagine if this tank was a lot smaller, then it would not work in my opinion, because then the proportions wouldn't work, right? Because it only works when you make it the same size for this thing. Okay, cool. This one also very interesting, right? So when you look at this thing, then you might say, oh, what is that, you know? And then you say probably, well, it looked like the skeleton of a whale that you see in a museum. And that's exactly what it is, right? But is it made out of bones? Well, no, it's not made out of bones. It's made out of something else. And I'll show you what it's made out of. It's made out of plastic chairs, right? And that is also very interesting, because it is something that is a natural thing, which is a skeleton, but it's made out of plastic, which is human-made, right? So this is also a little bit of a commentary at the same time about what people are doing to nature, right? Because there's so much plastic pollution in the ocean that if we keep on going, there won't be any more skeletons for us to look at, you know, because all the animals will die. Well, actually, there will be a lot of skeletons to look at then, but at a certain point, there will be no more whales, for example, right? So that is a very interesting contrast. And this artist that make this one, he's a Canadian artist. He also make these, and these ones are very interesting too. Now you might find this a little bit difficult to recognize because you are not in Canada, but in Canada there's a lot of native art, right? So native art in the West Coast kind of looks like this. I'll super quickly show you a picture. North, east, south, I always have to do this. West Coast native art, here. It looks like this, masks. So they look like this, see? They're like masks made out of wood and things, and they're always carved, and they're very interesting. They look like this bird, for example, that you see over here, like something like this, or like this, like, it's really cool, it's very interesting stuff, right? Now, what this artist has done is he has combined West Coast native art together with shoes, right? So he is doing a old culture, which is like, you know, like the masks, and he's combining that with contemporary culture of sneakers, right? So both of those are basically, you can say in essence, have to do with tribal society, right? Because if you live in a tribal society, you share the same language and the same imagery, right? So the West Coast Native Americans, they used to share the same type of mask, and now you can say people that want to be part of the same group of people, they wear, for example, the same clothes. So people that like to wear sneakers also like other people that wear sneakers. So it's basically a comment on how culture is changing, right? Which is very interesting. Contrast is really something that can make art get meaning, and it's very easy. You can grab anything that you can think of. You can grab something that is completely opposite to it, and then you can just change a couple of things about it, and if you make it look nice, it is always gonna work, 100% guaranteed, right? Super fun. Here, show you one more thing here, just for fun. Here. Here, these are some really fat cars, for example, right? So normally a sports car or a cabriolet, it's all look like really nice and smooth and fast, but these ones are very much overweight, right? So that is fun, and that gives us a commentary on what happens if you're in the car all the time. Then you're no longer like walking to places where you want to go, so you can become a little bit overweight, for example, right? And as long as you make it look nice, it's gonna be fun, right? And interesting. You can do so many things with contrast, right? So I have now taught you all the elements and design principles, and I really need you guys to understand them and know them, because we are using them to communicate. If you want to find out how your artwork works or if it looks good, then you can just go over all your elements and design principles and then find out if any of them need like a little bit more effort or something, right? Awesome. Okay. Now there is a